Halloween for 2025 is now in the past, but one thing that continues to rumble on is the debate on price. Should these mazes be free or should they be an upcharge? Well, I asked you guys in a poll, so stick around because we will be going through your comments. Right, before we get into this, I want to just start by saying that we are only going to be talking about theme park scare mazes here. I'm not talking about the independent scare attractions up and down the country. Clearly for those you need to pay entry, and that includes the mazes. But in particular with the theme parks, they all have different approaches to this, and we will go through various different scenarios. But if you take a look at probably the most common one is the approach that Merlin take. Park is open, you get a ticket to get into the park, and then they have the scare mazes as this extra thing on the side. Now, if you're not interested in the scare mazes, that's totally fine. You just pay for your entry to the park, do the rides, do whatever you want to do, and you leave. If you do want to do the scare mazes, then you have to pay for them, and they've got a number of different options. You can get like a one-shot, you can get fast track, you can get the combi deals that includes various mazes, or if you're a pass holder, you can also do the unlimited approach. Then you've also got something like Blackpool Pleasure Beach, where their approach is during the day it's all about the rides, no scare attractions whatsoever. The park then closes, and then it reopens in the evening specifically for the scare attractions, and they actually kind of restrict it to a smaller area, makes it a little easier for them to manage, and then they do have some rides running. Now, that's a scenario that is not going to work in a Merlin park. Far too complicated to try and clear that park out and then let people back in again, so I can see why they don't do that. The third option that I've experienced personally is Liseberg, and that is where their scare mazes are just part of the ticket. So, you go into the park during the day, at some point during the day the mazes will open, and you just stand in the queue for them like you would for any other attraction. So that's the approaches that I've seen. There may be others out there, but that's the three that we're going to start talking about. So there's one obvious thing here, and that is that these mazes are not free for the park, right? They obviously have to spend some money designing them, building them, constructing them, maintaining them, paying for the actors. No doubt they've got insurance costs involved in there. There'll be running costs for things like special effects, lighting, sound, all that kind of stuff, right? So the mazes for the park are not free. Completely, that is definitely the case. Even returning attractions, right? You could argue, well, if a maze comes back 3, 4, 5, 6 years in a row, you're not paying to build it. There's obviously maintenance, but you still have the other costs. You still have the kind of energy costs for running the audio and the lights, etc. You've still got to pay the scare actors, etc. So, there is an inherent cost involved with these attractions. So I'm not saying that they should be completely free, personally at least. I'll go through your comments later on. I do wonder though, the fact that Liseberg have done this in a way that it is just included with your ticket. So, the problem with that, and I've not experienced Halloween Horror Nights, I'm doing that next year and I'm really curious about that one. My understanding is it's similar in that once you're in the park and they're open, you just stand in the queue. Now, when I did Liseberg, I only did one maze that had like a 30 to 40 minute queue, because the rest of them were over an hour and I didn't have time for it. So that is the one downside to them being kind of like free. Now, I don't know if Liseberg had increased the price of the ticket that day. Many of you have suggested that, and it kind of makes some sense to me. But at the same time, not everybody's there for the scare maze. So on that respect, I kind of like Blackpool's approach, where during the day it's just a theme park, but then in the evening, if you want to do the scare mazes, that's open specifically for that. My issue with the Blackpool approach though is that you get one shot at everything, and the biggest problem with all of these paid attractions is consistency, right? We all know, so if you go on a roller coaster or dark ride, you're going to get mostly the same experience every single time. There are some subtle variances on coasters between front row, back row, etc., but by and large, it is the same thing every single time. That's not true when it comes to scare mazes. There are a number of factors. Obviously, you've got which actors are in the maze, whether you're at the front or the back of the group, how many people are in your group, whether the other people in your group are problematic. I've done some mazes at Thorpe Park where I just had screaming teenagers and I couldn't pay any attention to what's going on. I've been at the back of groups, so all the jumps are happening at the front. So the biggest problem with scare mazes is that inconsistency. And I think that is where, personally, I've got a bit of an issue with the cost. Not that there is one, don't mind that. As I've already said, the parks have to make some money. It costs them money to run these attractions. My issue is, if you get one shot at something and it's a bad run through, well, your choice is to pay for it again, you're then out of pocket, or live with the fact that you didn't enjoy that experience. There's a second part to that actually, which is something like Compound at Alton Towers, and I think survival games used to be like this at Thorpe, but when I did it, it wasn't. There's that kind of randomness of the maze, right? A lot of these mazes are very, very linear. You go in, you go through it almost like a conga, and you come out the other end, right? So you all see the same stuff, happy days. You've got something like Compound, and when I did the behind the scenes, there's 12 separate rooms in there, and they worked out there's something like 36 different combinations of rooms that you can do. There's probably more than that, because there's nothing stopping you coming out of one room and going back into another. If there's no actor there to guide you, you can do what you like. That's great if you're one of those people who has the unlimited pass, or it's a park that is free to kind of do the mazes and you can just stand in the queue and do it again and do it again. If it's a paid experience, that to me is a problem, because you don't see all of it, and then you're kind of like, somebody goes, so I did it with Carly recently, we went completely different routes, we got split up, went completely different, she was out about a minute before me, saw completely different rooms. Like, it just seems bonkers. The worst one actually was Daz Games Panic, whatever it was called, at Alton Towers. The concept of that was ridiculous. Now, I kind of think it would have been, I've said this in one of my videos, it would have been a good attraction if it wasn't a scare maze, right? It was just this interactive experience that you do, you pay for, blah blah blah. It was terrible as a scare maze, and the thing that really kind of wound me up was the whole purpose of it was to get out there as quick as possible, to be top score. So you're paying money to be in there as little time as you possibly can. Let that sink in for a minute. You're paying to have as little time in that maze as possible. Now, again, if you're one of those holders of the unlimited pass and you just can do it again and again and again, and you're competing with yourself to get a better score, fine. Happy days, no problem. But to those families and one-offs who just kind of visit once, that's my biggest frustration with the paid thing. Yeah, I kind of just feel like this paying for one shot or only getting one experience of it and having to pay again, it just kind of ruins it. Anyway, that's enough of my ramblings. As I say, I put up a poll and I asked you guys whether you think they should be included in the price, whether you should have to pay for them, or whether you should pay and get unlimited access to them. And the poll basically came in that most of you think they should be included. Now, I don't know if I wasn't clear on whether that should be the ticket price is already inflated to accommodate it, or they're just included. But that seems to be the most common one. And the second one is, if you do have to pay for it, you should get unlimited attempts at it. And I kind of feel like that's my go-to with this, because the other problem is that they don't have the same throughput as an attraction, like a ride, right? You're limited because you either put massive batches through, which then ruins the experience, or you're only putting through 8-10 people at a time, and then you have to wait a couple of minutes till they're through before you then send the next batch. So, they can build large queues. So yeah, the unlimited thing to me makes a lot of sense. Like, let you pay for it, because if you're not interested in the mazes, great, save some money. But if you are, if you can pay for it and be like, even if what they did was, you've got a time slot between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock. In that 2 hours, you can do as much as you want. Hits 5 o'clock, game over, right? And then you could just go and do them. That'd be great. But anyway, I said I would read out some of your comments, so let's get into them, shall we? Right, first one here, not a Halloween guy, so all I want to do is some night rides. Also a valid point. But make them cheap so everyone in the mazes is in the mazes and not in the queues, and he'll be a happy bunny. Well, that's a very selfish one, but I agree with that. If that's your thing and you're not interested in the mazes, then fine. And that's kind of where this not having them included in the price sort of works, right? Because if you're there just because you want some night rides, especially at the Maryland parks, it's not common. So if you want those night rides and you're not interested in the mazes, I can see the argument to not make you pay extra for something you're not going to use. Fair play. Right, definitely should be included in the cost of admission. I follow a Kings Island and Dorney Park group on Facebook, and no one is happy about the upcharges. I don't think anyone's happy about upcharges in general, and I think the other problem is the prices are continuing to rise, right? I get it, the cost of things is more expensive for everybody. These companies, obviously it's costing them more for energy bills, for staffing costs, etc. But at the same time, Joe Blogs that's turning up to the park has less money than they had before. The cost of everything is going up. So it's a chicken and an egg, like who has to pay for this and how much to charge. But that's part of the problem, right? If the mazes were £5 a shot, probably less of an issue if you need to go for a round 2. They're currently what, 12, 16, £20 depending on which park you're in. That's not something you're going to repeat multiple times. I had a ticket this year that gave me multiple runs on all the mazes, and I think that should be the standard ticket, but definitely should be extra to the park. Charging everyone over 90 centimetres, it seems unfair. Right, I mean, that's the thing, right? And I think that's sort of what the poll's saying, although there's a lot of people saying it should be included. The alternative is, if you are going to have to pay for this, you know, you've paid for access to the mazes, not just you paid for one shot. Because if there's one particular maze you like, you might want to go in through it again and again and again, or you've had a bad run, you want to do it again, or it's something like Compound, you want to see different routes. So yeah, kind of my gut says make it a fee, but that fee should accommodate multiple shots. Up the park entry and include them, I say, and maybe open for a maze only day. That's an interesting idea. I find especially at Thorpe Park that it's divided between people who want to do the mazes and people who want to do night rides. That is a fair point, and there is an argument for that, and that's kind of, I mean, although I've got some frustrations with the Journey to Hell thing at Blackpool, that's their approach, right? They've basically got rides during the day, and then they've got mazes at night. Now you can do the rides at night, and they're, as I said earlier, they're fortunate they can clear the park out and then let you back in. That's not so easy in a Merlin park. They're a little bit bigger and a little bit busier. I think it's difficult commercially to justify not charging for the scare mazes. It's a considerable investment, and they still need to get some money from somewhere. You do get a lot of events like Scarefest and Fright nights with just with park admission. I would like to see more value for the surcharge though. I do appreciate quality over quantity, but for the prices that Towers charge, I would have expected at least 4 mazes. That's a fair point, and again, there's a few people have said that, you know, obviously they got rid of a maze this year. Well, in terms of number off, they got rid of 2 mazes, right? Did they get rid of 2? They definitely changed the mazes up, and there's now 3 where there was 4 previously. But the price of the ticket hasn't changed. So, yeah, I get that one. I totally agree with you on that. I don't mind, however, if you're charging for them, then I expect quality to be higher because you intend to profit. If the haunt is included in the general admission, then maybe my expectations are lower slightly. I think that's also a fair point, right? And I think there's a lot of people who get more frustrated at something that they've paid for and don't have a good experience than if it's included, right? So there's definitely that expectation of a level of quality when you have to pay. You know, if there's a fee involved, and certainly some of these are not that cheap, then if you've got a rubbish experience, well, you're going to be kind of miffed. Whereas if it was free, yeah, okay, you might have stood in a queue for half an hour and still be a little bit, you know, frustrated, but there's less kind of like, I've been ripped off, so completely agree with that point as well. 1 complimentary entry with a park, and then upcharge for more runs personally, but the prices are extortionate. When you compare scare attractions in the UK, you do feel robbed at these parks. That's an interesting one as well. I don't know, Liam, whether you're talking about, like in the case of Towers where they've got 3 mazes, are you proposing that you get 1 free shot on all of them and a second run is paid, or are you proposing that you get 1 maze for free and if you want to do the others you have to pay? Because I can see an argument for that, like sort of whet your appetite, because that's the other thing, right? There's a lot of people who don't know what these mazes are all about. I had a little rant in my recent video about that, and a few people took it as the I'm a content creator, I get special privileges. That wasn't my intention in any shape or form. But I think there's definitely that point that people will watch content to get a feel for what they want to do, right? Never been to a park before, you go watch some vlogs to see what it's like. Never been on a ride before, you watch a POV to see what it's like. Never been in a scare maze before, well, if it's Merlin, you can't. That's not strictly true. Thorpe Park do allow, at the press night, some filming. But do you know what I mean? Like, there's that element of, if you don't know what you're getting, it's difficult to contemplate paying for it. So the argument of giving you 1 free shot, well, you get a taste for what are scare mazes actually like. Am I actually going to be petrified? I went into them last year, the first one, terrified, well, not terrified, like nervous as hell, because I hadn't done one before, or done one many, many years ago, and I was like, what is this going to be like? And I came out laughing, and I've laughed at them ever since. So I can see the argument for 1 free shot. I think a one-time fee for all of them would be fair, but the queues, some of them bring in, even with having to purchase, I'm surprised they do it the way they do. I think that is the tricky balance they've got, right? Is that if it's paid, arguably you kind of restrict the number of people using it. I've still seen queues for some of the scare mazes that I've done recently, but equally, as I say, Liseberg where there was no upcharge, they were up at around about an hour for each of the mazes. So yeah, it's a balancing act, right? And again, that comes back to the problem about batching, because some of these mazes, they will put 10, 15 people through at a time, and that ruins it. You just, you know, the actors, they scare the start, the middle, the end. It's just, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So yeah, it's a tough balance. It's a tough balance. It definitely seems fair to pay, but you run the risk of bad batching, like we just talked about. And then at the minute, you have to pay to do it again and hope that you get a good run through. One cost with unlimited access would solve that problem. I also feel should be select days like scare mazes such as Burial Grounds or the Crows, where you can film in the maze. And just my thoughts, be interesting. It's an interesting concept. I don't understand. Somebody said to me in one of the comments, somebody was having a go at me about being a content creator. You wouldn't go into a cinema and film, so why would you expect to go into a film with this? Fair, I get that. The difference there is that the cinema, the movies have a trailer. They have something to tell you what it's like. You get, oh, that sounds interesting, I'm going to do it. Some of these scare mazes don't have that. They've got one image and maybe a little bit of text, and you're basically supposed to figure it out from that. Like, the parks that allow you to film, so I filmed at Blackpool recently, Thorpe Park allow people to film, they're using that as a method to promote. So, yeah, I think that's the thing. And as I said at the time as well, there was people doing the behind the scenes of Compound because it's a controlled environment, no scare actors, lights on, they can see what it's like and decide, do I want to pay for this or not? So I think they need to kind of show people what it's like. It could be official videos, right? It doesn't have to be like content creators or Joe Blogs film. I kind of get that, because when I've filmed, when I've been allowed to, you've got a torch in the actor's face, it kind of takes away some of it. And people dropping phones or breaking phones. I get why they don't just allow filming in general. Anyway, that's a separate issue. Once for unlimited run-throughs is fair enough. I think that seems to be a common theme here. I think they should still not be included, but well cheaper, although I would like to see Merlin mazes being the same cost because of financial issues. And this is the challenge, right? This is where, I said already, it's not going to be cheap for these parks to run these mazes. People don't have a lot of money. So it's finding that sweet spot where the park is at least getting back their costs, ideally making some money so they can improve them in future years, but also finding that balance of what people can afford. And I think that's maybe where the unlimited thing comes in, right? Because people feel they're getting their value, they'll be more willing to spend the money. I don't think there's much of a difference to the park whether you go through it once or 10 times in terms of cost. I mean, you're just standing in a queue to go back in it. So increase the price of the ticket to compensate for the increased cost of running the event. Blackpool missed the trick by not having the park open fully during Journey to Hell, and I think next year there'll be some massive changes as the ticket price has dropped to £15 to reflect this. Tricky one. I think I've only done Journey to Hell the last 2 years when it's been constrained into North Park. From what I've heard, it's been a lot better since they did that. It's allowed them to concentrate in that section of the park. All the scare actors are there, and it's a more focused event. Whereas from what I've heard, when it was spread out across the park, and let's be fair, Blackpool's a lot smaller than something like Towers or Thorpe. So when you try and spread an event across that, I was critical of Towers recently that, yes, they've moved some theming from Tower Street, but there was the odd pumpkin here and the odd statue there. Like, they're a massive location, right? So to kind of have Halloween spread out is difficult. So I kind of respect what Blackpool's done by condensing it into a very small area. I think that kind of works. They should have differing price points, park entry till 6, and then Halloween events on the ticket. So that's obviously what Blackpool does. The problem with that, as I've said already, is the larger parks would struggle, right? So I had the same thing in Disney when I went a couple of years ago. I was staying in one of their kind of fancy hotels, which meant I got to stay in the park 2 hours after it had closed. Different in Disney, you've got the Magic Band, right? So if you're a hotel guest, you still get access to the rides, and if not, you don't. You could do that in Blackpool, I guess, because they've got the e-ticket, so your e-ticket could just stop working at a certain time and then you're out. Somewhere like Towers, Thorpe Park, where there's no ticketing to get on the attractions, it's a lot more difficult for them to have this kind of like daytime and night event. So I think that works in some places, it's not going to work everywhere. Things like Halloween Horror Nights in Universal is pay one special event where all the mazes are included. Maybe we should just take that approach. You want to go for the day, fine, but if you want to stay for the event, it's extra. It works really well. I think so, and I'm really, as I said earlier, I'm doing Halloween Horror Nights next year. I really want to see what it's like, so I like that idea. I think it should be that as long as you're willing to queue up, they should be free and included and have a slightly higher admission price on Halloween dates. Wouldn't be too bad. Prime example, I recently went to Energylandia and was happy to find 6 scare mazes and scare zones included as long as I queued. Each one was around 50-minute wait, and they were batched in very tiny groups, so it kept the immersion. That's what I experienced in Liseberg, apart from the queues. The queues were a lot longer. As I say, they were around about an hour. I can see the argument for both. I really can. I think the current approach that we're seeing, where it's like pay for one shot and then pay for another shot and then pay for another shot, I don't like that. I just don't think it's fair. I think, for me personally, it's either going to be up the price of the ticket and just include them, but then there's people who don't want to do Halloween and then they're like, well, why do I pay extra? You could argue, don't go, but that's also when they've got night rides. Tough one. Or you've got the unlimited. I think that's sounding like the most common options here from you guys. As someone who has worked as a scare actor at Alton Towers, there is a lot of behind the scene costs, etc. So there should be an extra charge for them of some kind, and that's the way of the world, unfortunately. I completely agree, right? I mean, these things obviously aren't free. The park has to pay people to do these things. If the costs, etc., I get that. There's definitely an inherent cost associated with them, and that needs to be passed on somehow to the end user. It's just that question mark of how it's passed on. I've gone with paying for a one-off fee to do the scare mazes. There's certainly a lot of work goes into creating them, in addition to what the parks normally have to offer. I think that's exactly it. So, listen, there's definitely a common theme from you guys. As I say, it feels like nobody's against there being a cost. It's just that how that cost is conveyed to the end user. And I think, as I said already, the cost per run through, I think that's the wrong approach. I'd love to see them just making it, you pay for the mazes and you can use them as much as you want. Or even if it is just, the Towers one, if I remember correctly, you've got like the daytime run through and the nighttime run through, but you still only get one shot. Like if it was just, you've paid for daytime, so your ticket is valid between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock. If you can get on the mazes 10 times, good luck. If you can only get on 2, well, that's, whereas, yeah. And then the other approach, like Liseberg and obviously Energylandia have done, where it's like, we've upped the price a little bit and you can just stand in a queue as much as you want. I feel like that is the way to go. I'm curious, obviously we've still got a few years to wait for Universal to come, but when Halloween Horror Nights is here, I think a lot of things, not just the Halloween stuff, will change. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts down below, so get in those comments. I've been Chris, you've been watching Coaster Dad. See you in the next one. Adios.